Welcome back to another episode of TEV, and this is episode number 5, and we're moving, we're doing it. We surpassed episode 4, and we're representing that truth, entertainment, and value. But before we dive into this into the discussion for today, Chris and I have some interesting news to share about our personal lives. You want to go first?
Yeah. We had a delayed drop on our episode last week, and for a good reason. We wouldn't just leave you guys hanging for anything bad. My co-host over here, he's degreed up. His price just went up. Y'all better address him as Bachelor of Arts when you come to him.
Not doctorate.
Not yet. That takes time, but he's completed his undergraduate, and he's degreed in political science, business. He's a well-accomplished individual, so highest praise to him. Congratulations.
Appreciate it.
Yes, congratulations, man. Beautiful thing to see.
And but aside from collegiate awards, you got an award in life.
Yes, I did.
You got some experience.
Yeah, as he was, graduating and receiving his highest honors, I was getting peed on. I took a visit to the great city of New York, and upon my, entry into the subway, riding in a car, I witnessed a man who decided it would be good to, make use of the public space as a toilet, and I happened to be the closest one to him, and received some of his what they call it, yellow rain.
Yeah. He's going with yellow rain.
Yeah, I received some of that yellow rain. So I did not have the most glorious high achievement as my co-host did, but I learned a valuable lesson.
It was glorious.
Yeah, there was glory, I guess. Yeah, there was glory. I learned, don't stand too close to the rain because you'll get wet. And so,
unfortunately,
yeah. But if I may, do the honors, we have a word of the day today, and that word is satiate.
Yes.
So while Calvin was satiated, meaning to be satisfied fully by his achievement of receiving his bachelor's degree, I was not satiated as I was being relieved upon.
No, he was satiated.
He was very satiated.
Yeah,
yes.
he was got that relief that he was looking for.
He did get satisfied fully.
I'm glad. I'm glad.
He went to sleep after that, actually.
Yeah, I'm glad for him.
He peed on me and went to sleep.
He found peace.
He did peace. He found peace. Anyways, guys, today we have somewhat of a controversial topic. We can't stay away from controversy, it seems. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, we find peace in it.
We in there.
Yeah, we want to be in the mix. We want to, kind of tackle the things that nobody else tackles. So today we have the topic of the LGBTQ community, and we want to kind of dive into why so many, conversations and discourse surrounding that identity and community is so controversial. I think growing up in the South, we've seen a lot of traditionalist type of mindsets that are very much against that. But Calvin and I, we both attended colleges, a more liberal space where, we've seen some acceptance in that field. So, we kind of have a nuanced perspective that we kind of want to, muscle through today. So if you wanna start, I'll hand the mic over to you.
Well, as Chris has already stated, we're going to be tackling this issue of the LGBT community and the issues that they face and some controversial questions that are always in circulation between like the traditionalist view and the more liberal views, if you will, of the LGBT community. But that's like the overarching theme and the overarching question. However, a more direct question. Why should we care what other people are attracted to?
Or, yeah, I mean, we shouldn't, I don't think. I live a very complex life. And again, I think it's important for us to, identify ourselves before we make this conversation. Me and Calvin both identify as heterosexual, cis-gender men. So we have a
make sure we said that right. Heterosexual,
cisgender men, yes. So, we have a perspective that is our own. We, going to try our best to, get through this conversation with some nuance, with some understanding of identity that's not what we live. But, with that being said, I, for one, could care less about what somebody else does with their time, with their enjoyment, with their satisfaction, with their satiation, if you will, because I have my own life. And I am completely caught up in that, completely worried about that, completely invested in that, to where I find it very difficult, unless I am affected. I guess that's where some of my identity kind of boxes me out. That I wouldn't say that. Again, I think, I understand my identity, I understand my existence, and because of that, I would never want to impose that upon somebody else if they did not want to, or, be in disagreement with somebody's identity because of my own. I think there's a disconnect there that should really be examined. So I say that I should not care what people do with their attracted the word. Yeah.
I got you. To a certain extent, I don't care what other people are attracted to, but at the same time, I understand that this life is communal. We all affect each other. Our actions affect each other. As we saw in this recent pandemic, everything that we do, every action that we take affects one another. And one way or another, we're going to be affected. If you sneeze in this room, somebody's going to get that COVID droplet on them.
I can't say that word, but that droplet.
Well, we'll put a bleep in that when we edit it. But yes, when that droplet get on them, you go get the test. And that test come back positive. You gotta be bound for, at the time you had to be bound for about seven days or whatever it was, 14 days. But anyway, to some people's perspective, more so the traditionalist, if you will, conservative body, they would see this as an issue, more so because it's they will argue that there's some type of what's the word, endorsement or a push, if you will, of this narrative, of this lifestyle. More so they try to make the arguments about, the word was indoctrination. Try to indoctrinate their children, if you will, like in the classrooms with, when I was in my class, finishing up my studies, somehow we ended up on the topic. Well, the main topic was education and what is being taught in the schools and things of that nature. And somehow one of the students brought up something about like a book, an inappropriate book in the classroom, and how it talked about like, sexual identity and, different parent roles, 2 fathers, 2 mothers, whatnot. And so I could see how someone can take offense to that, especially if they are religious and they come from a household where it is heterosexual. And there's just facts here, but everyone comes from a heterosexual relationship. So I can see how that ideology and how that belief, in fact, can cause some conflict between someone that's LGBT of the LGBT community and someone that is more traditionalist and conservative in their approach and in their belief. So I think that's one aspect of why a person would care, only because, for the fact of like something like the education system, where you have young minds that are malleable in a sense. And some will argue that they already experiencing these things, or they have these feelings. But if you give too much education or too much knowledge to too much knowledge to a child on particular issues, I think it's easier for them to grasp it and make their own thoughts of it, if you will. But that doesn't necessarily mean that what is being taught, or whether that's in the school systems or at home, is necessarily right. And I think that's where Americans find themselves now, is if this is a matter of right or wrong. But then again, back to the original question, should they care?
Yeah, I mean, I think the right or wrong discourse is misplaced. I think it's a matter of is or is not. And I think when you think about, you said the facts, the reality, for years, for generations, there have been people who identify as LGBTQ, maybe not outwardly. Again, there was a point in time when those, individuals of that community were persecuted, for being outspoken, for acting in that identity. So, I think now when we're in a space where there is a certain comfortability that individuals in that community feel that they can, outwardly live and express that identity, that they are convicted enough to, want to fight for that, want to create a safe space for other individuals within their community or that are seeking to identify with that community to feel welcome and accepted. And I think it's difficult when you live in a world where there's pushback for such a simple concept as that, for people to feel like they can't exist as who they are when it comes to something that is not pertaining to somebody outside of, who they choose to engage with. I think that's a very difficult concept to grasp, when you feel pushback from people who are not even your concern, or irrelevant in a sense.
So I guess my whole standpoint, and you and I went to the same middle school, things of that nature, and I'm not going to name any names, but there was a situation where we, at least that was the first time I was introduced to the same-sex marriage, if you will. And, that was new to me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not new to me, but seeing it like in real life.
Yeah, in person.
Because it's something that you always hear about in the news. We trying to fight for our marriage rights and things of that nature. But to actually see it in person is different. At least for me. So I'm speaking from my perspective. But my question to that is, if a younger person, let's say 4 years of age, I would suspect that would have some implications for that child going forth. Yeah, at least some questions. Now, for me, I think it's three different outcomes of that. One, they're gonna accept it. They're gonna either accept it and be who they're gonna be. Whether that's a heterosexual male, or if it's a female, heterosexual female, or homosexual male or homosexual female. So and then the third option is, they accept it and follow suit. So it's those are some of the implications. I can see how that can be problematic for some parents. So if you're a parent and your child goes to school and he sees that or she sees that, and that's out the wheelhouse of the parent's control. Life is going to happen, things are going to happen, and I think as a parent, you want your child to be in the best position possible to learn as much as they can from you, the parent, to make sure that they are, in this case, someone would say protected and shit, shielded from things that they don't want their child to be pre-exposed to. Now that's coming from a parent's perspective. But life, once again, is going to happen and things are going to be seen, that a parent may don't want their child to see right now.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. I think that, again, like, reality takes precedent over everything. As you mentioned, if we're speaking from an education standpoint, right? There are untraditional channels, like in a school system, where as a young, child, a student, you'll experience some of these more taboo topics, especially at that age, like sexual material or curse words, for instance. You're probably gonna experience that just existing as a adolescent, child. I think, if there ever were a method to introduce children to real world, real life concepts, ideologies, that parents should welcome that idea. I don't think that, to learn about something, I think, that is as controversial as, an LGBT community or identity through a, channeled method like a curriculum is the most advantageous thing I think we can have in this world, to where it could be unbiased, not particularly, fed in a particular ideology, political ideology I'm speaking to, but one that states facts, that states, truth about, those identities, and we can't run from the fact that a lot of these identities have been marginalized and persecuted in the past. That is fact. So I think that when there is an attempt to not acknowledge those realities, it is a disservice to, one, the individuals who identify in those, that community, and, two, the reality that we live in. We're hiding our children, we're shielding our children from the life that they will face, and we're trying to keep them in the life we want them to see. I understand that there's a particular innocence that children have and should live in, but that should not lead to ignorance of real world issues, real world problems, real world, identities that they'll have to choose later in life. And I mean, that's specific to education, but just in general, like I said, a lot of these communities, a lot of these identities have been marginalized in the past. So just the opportunity that we have right now to even talk about, some of these, the controversy surrounding it, for a lot of individuals in these identities and communities to be platformed and be able to speak to some of their experiences is a very beneficial thing, I see. And I can't see how somebody could feel a way about that. As a black man in America, I've seen black people be marginalized as well. And, at the chance that, a lot of black people get, they want to make sure that they empower other black people, within their communities, within, their countries, whatever it may be. That's just a natural thing, to seek to empower individuals that are like you, that relate to your experience. So I can't see, I see it, it's easy to get mad at somebody who is not like you, who does not live like you, does not subscribe to your lifestyle. But I think that why are you placing that much stock into what somebody else is doing? That's my big issue. So, and to answer the question, I don't feel a need. I don't think anybody should feel a need to be so concerned about what somebody else is attracted to, if it is not you, especially.
Yeah, I think that's where the trend is going. Now, whether that's to the benefit or detriment of America, that is still up for debate. In regards to the shift of acceptance. Now, a lot of people are in a space of acceptance and tolerance, and a lot of people are in a state of a tolerable state, but don't agree, and then some people completely don't agree with that at all. So the person in the middle is probably more neutral. Like it's more of a saying like, do you, but don't affect me. I think that's what a lot of people are thinking.
I would agree.
And then, but the shift I feel like there in America is that it's more so like we're tolerable and we're accepting. Mm-hmm. I want to be an ally, but in reality is, I think it's okay to be in disagreement, and not necessarily live a life not to offend anyone. You know what I'm saying? It's like if I don't agree with this, that's okay. But as long as I'm in a place of respect.
Yeah, I think that's where it gets messy. I think a lot of times there's disrespect. I mean, we've seen, obviously, you talk persecution. We've seen, assault on individuals of differing sexual identities and gender identities. We've seen, brutal murders of individuals of that same vein. So, I think, and obviously just day-to-day slurs and mistreatment and marginalization, that has again and again shown itself in society. So, it's okay, it's natural to disagree. But if the respect is not there, then that is a huge indictment on what it means to be a human and what it means to be a productive member of society. So that respect is key.
Yeah, and I agree with that. It can become problematic when a person loses respect for another person, because that at the very essence of what it means to be a human, I feel like respect is at the forefront of that. When there is no mutual respect, that's where you get a lot of discourse from, and get, fights break out or wars and things of that nature. When someone feels disrespected, let somebody come spit in my face, something's gonna go down. But because that trust has been broken, that respect for me has been broken, and you crossed the line.
Well, question. We understand from the marginalized standpoint of, if there is a identity that is not, conforming with, I guess, the traditional, identity or a traditional mindset, ideology, that there could be some pushback, there could, some marginalization there. But do you feel, from the other perspective, that, a traditionalist, somebody who is probably in opposition to the concept of a LGBTQ identity and community, whether they feel a lack of respect, whether the quote-unquote agenda push is infringing upon their existence, their rights, their livelihood? Do you think something like that exists, or is that a one-sided phenomenon?
I think from conversations in the past about like the majority and minority situation, just because heterosexual people are the majority in this situation, and a lot of things are set in stone from a heterosexual perspective. For example, like the Spanish language is masculine and feminine. And that's something that's set in stone in language. in their culture, and it's ingrained. So let's say if someone was trying to infiltrate the Spanish language and change it and make it more suitable for like the LGBT community, to where there's a breakdown of gender identity within the language, you're breaking down a lot of things in that. And for someone that has been speaking the language their whole life, and for that to be deconstructed, I feel like that's asking a lot, to a certain degree, because you're asking them to change the whole verbiage. Or now that could be very hyper, like a hyper example, if you will, like to reconstruct the whole language. I'll just use that as an example. But if that is the case in some scenarios, then yes, I think it's some people from a traditionalist standpoint are just the common heterosexual population would feel some type of pushback there, or some type of what was the thing you said in the question?
Yeah, just some lack of respect, or just experience some disrespect from, I guess, a quote unquote agenda push.
Yeah, I think they could see it as something disrespectful, or they could see it as an agenda being pushed. And I think a lot of people question. Some people will say that there is no agenda, and then some people will say that there is an agenda that the LGBT community is trying to push. I can see both sides, because on one, so from the LGBT community's standpoint, I'm not I'm just assuming here if there is an agenda, allegedly, but if there's not an agenda, allegedly, but if I was in that community, it would just be my lifestyle. This is who I am, right? And then on the other side of that, let's say there is an agenda. Well, I want other people to feel how I feel. I want people to see my perspective. And you see that, and I see this more in all type of communities. The Black community, Latino, Hispanic community, where there's something to fight for, and voices are not being heard, or there's some type of disrespect going on, injustices going on, and people want that justice to be found and highlighted and implemented. So, and I think that's what's going on here, and I think it's the one that makes the most sense. Therefore, I feel like a lot of people will say, yes, there is an agenda, because of those factors alone. So if you feel marginalized, I feel like that gives you more incentive to push, or like we were saying in previous conversation, overreact to in response to a lack of. So when there's a lack of, if a person feel like they're not being tolerated, then yes, there's an overcorrection to be tolerated. So and the question is that healthy? Is that good for America's society? Is that good for the world's society to overcorrect on certain issues when the common ground is where we need to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think just based on progression of society, that is a necessity. The marginalized, I think it's a necessity for the marginalized to, when given a platform, to fight with all your life, to fight with all your might, to ensure that you can maintain and grow that platform. I think we've seen it time and time again with some of the marginalized communities that you brought up just now. And I think that, again, when you were in a spot where you were being persecuted for just existing in how you believe you should exist, when now you have a sliver of acceptance and a sliver of understanding and an opportunity to, I don't think necessarily change how the world maneuvers through you, but to at least show yourself and your place and your why, you should exist in the world. You should always take that opportunity to do that, to inform, to educate people who may not understand, who may not have, experienced, that identity or that community because of, other reasons. So I think you should always take that opportunity. And for that reason, I wouldn't call it an agenda. I don't think that an LGBTQ community has anything to gain by quote unquote converting, heterosexual individuals to, LGBTQ identity. I don't think they're particularly being forceful in how they go about, I think, again, in fighting for representation and fighting for rights and protection, I think that's a fight that everybody should be able to get behind for the most part, especially if the greater good benefits and nobody is worse off. And I think that's the truest statement of this whole conversation.
I will say, I believe everything has an agenda. Even
agenda is
even BLM, even BLM.
Agenda is a tough word. I think agenda implies something to be.
It's not a tough word. I think it's been we've added more connotation to it. I feel like it's been overused to the word agenda.
I agree.
But there's nothing wrong with the word agenda. A plan per se.
I don't know if basic human rights are an agenda.
It's no anything intelligent, anything that is intelligent to get something done or to promote something, or even if you like Calvin, myself, I have an agenda to be Calvin every day.
Technically.
So I just don't word it in that way, but I'm not incorrect by saying that. But like everything that is intelligent has an agenda, to promote its intelligence. So now the problem is whether that agenda has ill will, ill intent, to cause harm to society or, to a community. And I think that's where the agenda has gotten a bad rep or a bad connotation.
Are you saying the concept agenda, or are you speaking to the LGBTQ community, quote unquote agenda?
I'm just
the agenda in general.
Just agenda in general, but it can apply to the LGBT community and other groups as well, other communities as well. In these instances, you look at something like the Proud Boys or something like that. They have an agenda. It's
I think when you look at a lot of these extremist groups who intentionally prop themselves up to diminish other individuals, for me, that's an agenda. I personally have something to gain. I personally want to, propel myself at the expense of others. But again, what I see with the LGBTQ community is fighting for a seat at the table, fighting for, a platform, fighting for a representation. And I think it's interesting, something that we talked about pre-production was, if there is an agenda, it would be by business, corporation, in trying to get ahead of the curve of representation, and allowing individuals to identify with their product through these identities and through, these communities. I think if there is an agenda, it's a top-down big corporation thing. But on an individual, identity to identity level, I don't think anybody is pushing any identity down anybody's throat or trying to convert anybody to any particular style of life or way of life. I think it's just a necessity to make people feel more comfortable in a progressive society. If society does not change and grow, I think of transportation, right? Started off on foot. We got to the use of animals, horse and carriage, cars, and now we have planes and trains and boats and everything, right? That's normal. Progression is normal in society. Acceptance of new technology, innovation, whatever that looks like, is normal. If we can't do that on a human-to-human level, there's a disconnect of what it means to be human. So that's for me, that's the key.
So we're at this notion of progression, and you try to illustrate that through the use of vehicles,
transportation. That's what I have.
So when I think about things like that, it's a means to an end. And in the instance of that metaphor or analogy, if you're in a car or if you're in a train or plane, whatever, the means to an end is getting to point B. So going from point A to point B. And from the standpoint of I guess to lump it all together, the agenda, for some people it's the agenda setting, and then for some people it's just the notion of how things should be. So ideally a person would say how it should be is a heterosexual relationship versus a homosexual relationship. So the means to an end, at least for me, I'll speak for myself here, but the means to an end would be procreation. Begetting a child, creating generations, if you will. That's like the whole, for me at least, it's a whole thing. I think that's like the biggest controversial thing out of all this, because in one aspect, if when we was talking about education earlier, that's centered around children, and the notion of procreation and having children. That's another topic surrounding children, and I think not just things pertaining to the LGBT community, but just sexuality in general. That's a heavy topic, because as we've seen, there's so many avenues that you can go down in conversations, debates about it. But at its basic form, we all know what sex is for. It's several things. Sex for pleasure, and after pleasure, there's offspring. But think about this. I think we talked about this in previous conversation. Without the pleasure aspect of it, there's no incentive to have children. If there's no pleasure to have children, then there's no other reason to have children but to have them at that point.
Are you saying satiation of parenthood, yes, or the pleasure of the act? Sorry, just clarifying.
Wait. State the question one more time.
Are you speaking, when you said the pleasure to have children, were you talking about the satisfaction of parenthood or the satisfaction of completing the act?
I would say both, because it's all intertwined.
Okay, well,
but that also doesn't make a person a parent. Not either, just because they can complete the act. As we've seen in just life in general, people have kids all the time, but we're not the best parents. But I mean, it's, you do that in hopes that they can be. But that, I mean, I feel like we're getting off topic. Yeah, but if you had a question pertaining to that,
no, I was just gonna, I guess, get back to the proliferation aspect of it. I think, again, if you subscribe to the notion that the purpose of sexual intercourse is to procreate, then I can definitely see you having an issue with individuals who participate in, same-sex intercourse. However, if you subscribe to the notion that in addition to procreation, that pleasure is a main ideal of sexual intercourse, then I don't see, and I feel like that is a large majority, if not everybody, in this world. You know, I think that's really weird to me when you feel like you can enjoy pleasure and somebody else can't. I think that's weird. And I think to mask it under the guise of, well, I'm doing it as a means to an end is ignorant, because you're most likely not having intercourse just to have a child. And if that were the case, then, you know, there'd probably be less children. So I don't like the guise of, you know, kind of a moral high road of, well, I'm doing this because for the human race, society, my contribution as a human. All fine and dandy, but that may not be everybody's obligation, desire, fulfillment, satiation. You know, everybody does not want to be a parent, or do not want, whatever the tense is, does not want to be a parent. You know, everybody doesn't find satisfaction, enjoyment in that aspect of life. And again, we're in a world where it's not a necessity for everybody to be a parent, or to think about proliferation like that, and where people, you know, have the luxury of finding pleasure in sexual intercourse. So I don't think that is ever a strong, valid point for me, at least.
Well, I think it's just, once again, it's just one of those things that's intertwined, because it goes so hand in hand when it comes to like sexuality and sex and on relationships and things of that nature, and you bring up a notion of like fulfillment and satiation. I think that's even intertwined in regards to fulfillment. If a person, I think it brings more accountability, if you will. And I think I stated this in other conversations. You know, if you have a child, you know, I don't have any kids, but if you have, allegedly, yeah. But if I think if a person has children, it's going to make them accountable to be a better person, be a better man, better woman. As we've seen with our own parents, we've seen the best of them, and you could say you've seen the worst, but they always bounce back from it because they have to still provide for us, and that remains the constant. But a person that doesn't have that grounding, what is constant?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think just as the nature of life, we're once children, we're adults, you know, we experience parenthood without being parents ourselves, all throughout our lives. So I don't think that that's something that can just disappear because you identify a certain way. And I think even to a lot of the LGBTQ individuals who are parents, who adopted or through surrogates, you know, they have been able to be parents. You know, I don't think that you can generalize that parenthood is not sought out or, you know, even coveted within that community. I think that very much so. You know, they are, you know, that community is probably very attentive to, you know, being a parent, being, you know, within their kid's life, interacting and being open and accepting to those, you know, children. So I would say that, yeah, I don't think that that's a factor that's missing from that community. I don't think that can be a knock against them and their lifestyle. Again, there's plenty of heterosexual couples that don't bear children, that don't want to be parents. So this is, you know, on both sides of the fence, you see similar ideals, similar expressions. So I don't think we can sit here and pin one as being disinterested in fulfillment or, satiation at all. I don't think that's fair.
I think that to stay more relevant, I want to bring up the recent event with Chris, not you, but Chris from Mr. Beast. He recently became a trans woman, and Mr. Beast has come out and reported that he's in support of Chris, and I believe I haven't been keeping up with it, but I believe he's still with the Mr. Beast crew. And I know a lot of people was trying to make headlines about, he should go and all that stuff. And that's not my place that's Mr. Beast's place if he wants to keep him or whatever the case may be. But I just wanted to use him as an example of what happens in that situation. He was formerly married. And then when he was going through the transition, he, divorced, got a divorce with his wife at the time, and I believe he has a child. And so my only question is, so if you're that child and you have to grow up and face reality at some point, he's going to have to realize that his dad, was his dad at one point and has now become a trans woman. What is that process? What does that process look like for the child? And just from my own upbringing, I feel like men have a responsibility to give their children identity, if you will, because if their fathers don't, then who will? And you will only. And I'm not saying that the world is 100% right all the time, but some things there are right, some things that are wrong. But if there's anybody that you would want your child to get anything from, that would be your identity and affirmation from your parents. And I think in the absence of that, that could be a problem. And to kind of correlate that example to, the black community, we always talk about like, where the father's at. I think that's an example of that, just in a different light. How we always be like, where are the men? Where are they? Where are the real men? Why they're not stepping up to the plate to be home, to be present? Why they have to be incarcerated or and it's unfortunate, for those situations, and we've been blessed to have, our fathers in our lives. But I feel like that's a serious thing to consider, and I think quite a new thing that's going to become even more prevalent in the days to come. But I just question what would that look like? What would that process? What would that conversation? What would the impact? What would be the implications of that going forth for a child like Chris from Mr. Beast? What would be that for his child? Would it be would it be confusion? Would it be depression? I don't know. Or would it be just fine? So those are some of the things I think about from an example like that. But it's it could be a representation of what's to come.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to begin with that is not the first time that something like that has happened. I mean, I think of Caitlyn Jenner, and how she transitioned. I think that a lot of men and women have masked their identity, have conformed to traditional identity expressions, with the hopes of, perpetuating a narrative that has existed for a while. So, you can imagine the amount of, homes that have parents who are not happy with their current sexual orientation and would wish to, live, quote unquote, their truth. But for the sake of, the existence that they've created, they choose not to. The effect that there's an effect there as well, as my point. I feel like whether the action is taken to, express the identity, the true identity and transition, or just live in that fully or not, there's an impact on that child, on that family, on all those relationships. So I don't think that that's something that's just exclusive to an individual who is transitioning or seeking to live in an alternative identity. I guess what you would call trauma in this sense is not few and far between, and it comes of every single action and reaction that we experience from our parents, from our family, from our relationships in life. So yeah, I mean, for that point, I don't want to, I guess, make it seem like that's a one-off. That type of thing is probably a lot more frequent than you would, I guess, originally imagine.
Well, my thing is with that, pertaining to like someone in Mr. Beast's Chris position, I don't know his last name. For people alike that are in marriages and relationships of that nature, and they have a child or something of that sort. My question would be, well, it's a lot of questions, but how they got to that point. You know what I'm saying? Was it something, could it have been just pressures from childhood to
got to what point exactly are you saying? Got to a point where they
just got to a point of marriage, like,
oh, well, I mean, I
or just conceiving a child.
Yeah, I mean, I think societally, especially you think of, people who are, 30s, 40s, growing up in a time where, again, there was social persecution for living in an alternative identity. You felt a need to conform, like, if you weren't accepted as who you were, and you knew you weren't going to be accepted, you would be outcasted, you would be socially castrated. Why would you live outwardly in that, So that's the point of in a modern time when we're more accepting, or at least there's an attempt to be more accepting on a wide scale. There's people who are more comfortable now in saying, you know what, I did this, I still care about this family, I still care about my children, my relationships, but I'm no longer fearful of who I've always been or who I want to be. And I think that just being in a more accepting society has encouraged a lot of people to kind of make that huge jump to say, I'm okay with this now.
Before we run out of any more time, I want to hit this could be our last point, our question. Should traditionalists be able to push back? This is in connection to a previous question that we had about the agenda setting and things of that nature.
Respect and disrespect.
And deeming if something's right or wrong. So this would be more along the lines of right or wrong. Should traditionalists push back on if they feel that they have experienced pushback from the LGBT community? Is it okay for the traditionalists to come out and say, I don't agree with this and it's wrong? Because there's the notion of like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and things of that nature, and that covers every race and creed and sexual orientation.
So we hope.
As long as that stands true, it should. But in that regards, if a traditionalist, and I guess I would be more so talking about we know, like in the Christian faith, that they are held to a standard, and then also, because there's I think a misconception with the Christian community, at least, and the people of just faith in general, that there is some type of hatred or ill will, but I believe they genuinely believe that they're looking out for the interests of all people as a whole and a collective, and historically what has been proven to work, and hinting at the term traditional, because it's something that has been in at the forefront. It's been the most precedented thing there is, and one may argue that it works. This is what has brought us this far, to even have a conversation of LGBT community controversies, religious controversies, and things of that nature. So I feel like they may reserve the right to state their claims, to feel the way that they may feel. So I guess the question is, do they have the right to call something wrong, action or lifestyle wrong, or do they have the right to say it's right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, obviously, within the confines of our amendments, everybody has the right to speak to which they feel fit. But you must understand what comes with that, the perception that you'll hold once you speak to those certain things. And you must also be mindful of your tone and how you come across. And again, I don't particularly believe in catering to any body, especially if you have a different opinion. But again, the respect level must be maintained. I think, at least from my experience, I've known a lot of people of faith to come off very abrasive towards individuals of the LGBTQ community. And I don't think that's the most reflective of any religious ideals that the faith community would hold. So I think in that, being mindful of your morality and your belief system, if you are indeed doing this for altruistic means, there's a certain way that you should go about that and express that, and that way should never be disrespectful or hurtful or cause anybody to reject you as a person. So I think if all those things are maintained, then yes, you can not take issue, but at least rebut, be able to quote unquote fight back or push an agenda of your own if that's the case. But again, there's a certain level of decency that we should hold to each human. Everybody that is alive and breathing should be respected, should be listened to, and attempted to be mediated, find common ground with. So yeah, I think the ability, it does exist. It should exist, obviously, but it should be utilized in a correct manner, in a respectful manner.
According to the First Amendment, like you said, if all things are being equal and fair, I feel like both parties have the right and the ability to because it's a level playing field and it's fair game in a sense, when it comes to marketing certain things or being an advocate for that's free range or free game. So to that point, I'm in agreement with both parties in regards to expressing what they want to express, and to the extent of expressing if they believe that what they're doing is wrong. Because I watched videos in the past I know it's this guy like Pastor David Lynn or something like that. I think that's his name. He's out of Canada or something like that, but he's like a street pastor in a sense. But they always have like controversies and stuff, and I watch it because I want to see like the actual dialogue on the streets, if you will, of what's, because when you watch a video like that, you see the most extreme points of views. So like you get a gist of what's the overarching questions or concerns or just temperaments of how people feel, and it's like, and it varies a lot. So you see like a huge pushback, and you see the extremism of it all. To the point where you might see someone say, I want your kid to be this way, or something like that, something along those lines. And then obviously the where we talked about earlier, the overcorrection, well, I don't want my kids to be this way, that type of thing. But it's fair game in that, like, it's that conversation, that dialogue is fair game, and in hopes to, they converse for a reason, in hopes to convert someone's thinking and ideology. Because at the end of the day, someone's right and someone's wrong. But it's just so nuanced in these conversations. But I do agree that if you're a traditionalist, you can come out and say that is wrong. And not only that, I feel like we live in a day and age where a lot of people are sensitive, and people shouldn't take too much offense to certain things, only because at the end of the day, you got to go back home and you have to live regardless of your decisions. And the only thing I argue is that whatever decision a person makes, you're able to live with those decisions. The lifestyle that you choose to live, you're able to live with those decisions. I'm going to bring up a word. That word is consequences. A lot of people that even has like a negative connotation to it, but consequences is just a term used to describe an outcome of any situation, whether it's good or bad. So, for example, if I'm out here wilding out and I have a son or something like that, a lot of people would deem that.
You've done that already, right?
Not yet. Yeah. But like if somebody, I hear, unprotected one day or something like that, and they have a son, they'll be like, I messed up or something like that. So the consequence would be, they'll deem it as a negative consequence. But in that same context, if a person, got married and planned to have this child, or put themselves in a position to be financially stable to have a child, then it'd be like, oh, we just had a child, it's my first. So same act, but different response to a consequence, of an action. And I would say in the same regard to like the LGBT community, despite all the conflicts and controversies, if you're willing to, because it's even in the Black community and things of that nature, just throughout history, there's been a lot of things that have caused people to be oppressed, to be depressed, and all these other things, to be set back and be held back. But my question is, when you go forth and you continue to live, the only thing you have is your response and how you respond to that. And based on those decisions, based on those choices, are you willing to live by it, and are you willing to die by it? And if your answer is yes to some of those things, then it's not much a person can say or do to you to make you think otherwise. But a question for another day, is that dangerous? Is that beneficial still? Like, to be so naive and so caught up in what I want to do, is that beneficial still? You see what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, we always responding to something. I think y'all brought this up earlier, in previous conversation, that there's always an overcorrection, like we've been saying in this podcast, to something that has affected me greatly in the past. So if you felt like, if you know, I know that a lot of people in the LGBT community have been discriminated against. There's been some prejudice, some things of that nature. But still, you know, overcorrection can still be birthed out of that. But to answer the question, yes, and I hope I answered the question. I feel like it's okay for both parties to push back in a sense. But it'll be all for naught if some type of common ground was in place, because at the end of the day, regardless of what you believe, Chris believe, I believe, you know, you still have to live and because I know a lot of people feel, you know, like for example, like the KKK, like some people are actually like that, you know, like that's extreme, but some people are actually like that. In their line of thinking, and you know, just hatred. But that's not the solution at all. And then nothing at all is not the solution. I feel like these conversations are beneficial and impactful to get to somewhere. But have any closing thoughts, I guess?
Love all. You know, satiate our own emotions, satiate our own beliefs. But again, love all. Seek to understand, seek to be knowledgeable, and not cast away things that don't look like you, or don't talk like you, or don't understand how you understand. Common ground should be desired by all. I think that's my closing statement here.
Well, you know, common ground is something that we always been talking about in this episode and previous episodes and other podcasts. And I think we should strive for that. And I think my biggest thing is, and a lot of comedians talk about this, like Dave Chappelle, your Chris Rocks, and some others. I mess with Dave Chappelle a lot, but you know, not being offensive and not taking offense to a lot of things, because we live in a world where it's diverse, and we have to respect that, and we don't have to agree with everything, but we at least have to have some common ground on these things, at least at the very minimum, going forth. So, but anyway, without further ado, that was the end of this conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you maybe gain some new perspectives, or you, if you want to interject on the dialogue and maybe state where we've
come up short,
yeah,
underexplained, or maybe offended. You know, we welcome all interaction in our comments. You know, we ask that you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And you know, without further ado, have a TEV day.
Thank you. Thank you. It's about time.
That's all I got, guys. Yeah. A couple of you made it a point to single me out, tell me I have to say it, so here I am. That's not my last time, though.
Oh, and one more thing. I really want to say this. This might be another topic for another podcast, but the cancellation over these things as well. That's problematic.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah.
It's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, conversation for another day. But if you want to hear that conversation, leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe. all that Chris said. And have a TEV day.